we can begin by sharing with you some ground rules. We are recording this session, so in case if it's not okay with you, please let us know, and we'll be sure to take your consent. I don't see takers, so that's good already. Please keep your yourselves on mute and keep your cameras off as you're speaking. If you're speaking to us in Hindi, please feel free to do so. There is quite some time also for discussions in this. So as you're hearing things, free to also literally use the chat section, and we can come back to those questions as we go along. It's quite straightforward for today. If you go straight to the next slide, Nitya. Thank you.
So just a quick introduction to where we are as a CONNECT community. We have about 50 member organizations working across 23 geographies. We have more than 180 individual members on our Slack workspace, and on an everyday basis, we have sort of engaging and vibrant discussions. We have more than 75 submitted research projects on our web platform, and we've of course kicked off 2 working groups, which have been have been working for about, I think, 2 months. We have one on nutrition and food security, and the other one is on frontline workers. And of course, we have a series of ongoing public as well as member-only events. And the coffee hour, as the one we're meeting here today, is a weekly event or bi-weekly event as we go forward, where we kind of convene to have discussions with member organizations, and they're usually on Thursdays between 4 to 5. So if any of you do have exciting work or ideas that you'd like to share with the rest of the community, please do feel free to get in touch with us at hello@cornet.in, and we'd love to kind of go create a coffee hour or even an ethics dialogue session with you. So for today's session, we've kind of, over the last week or so, the Secretariat has been on an endeavor to kind of collect feedback from members of the community to just understand how we've been doing, also trying to map the road ahead and just see, if we could kind of come together and actually dictate what we want from this network as we move ahead. So as of now, we've already conducted 18 feedback sessions with organizations as well as individual researchers, which include CGIS, Vihara, NCAER, Sambodhi, Dalberg, and of course, many, many others. And what we primarily wanted to learn about was sort of 3 pillars. Number one, we wanted to obviously understand what the overall experience has been like and whether the value propositions have worked or have not worked for you as a researcher or as an organization. How have you engaged with the network in terms of the events that we've been organizing, as well as the different channels of communication that we've been sort of working across, whether that's Slack, email, research summaries, blogs, newsletters, and other such things. As well as something we wanted to focus on for today's session is trying to understand what the future of CoreNet would look like in the short as well as medium term. And where do you see yourself as maybe a researcher or as a research organization within the network in the next few coming months?
Great. So broadly, we wanted to structure this conversation not so much around the success or failure of the Secretariat or how well and not well we are doing, but really think about how we've been able to bring about success in terms of the value propositions or for the network itself. And so that's closely linked to, desired outcomes that all the different members saw from the network itself. These came from guiding principles. These are again developed from the initial co-creation workshops that we've done with a few set of members. The broad ones I will just repeat for everyone's clarity. Broadly, we were talking about a shared sense of purpose. The first one was to maximize impact and minimize harm. Then there was inclusion of diverse voices. Then there was the idea of building trusted partnerships among members as well as stakeholders. And finally, in awareness that this is self-initiated, that there will be self-directed participation in government. So how do we capture some of that? That sort of led to the value proposition and collaboration norms that you can see on your screens. And broadly, we were trying to ask members of how many of these values they saw being met in the past few months or not. If you go to the next slide, Nitya. So the first one was around improving research and research practices. the second one around collating evidence, driving visibility, driving uptake of research among decision makers, and sustaining ongoing efforts. So maybe what we'll do is we'll take you through each of these five and some of the things that we uncovered in them, and then have a broader sort of conversation around this. So if you could go to the next slide, Nitya, and share with us some of the thoughts that came out from this first piece.
Right. Thanks for that, Rohan. So as Rohan mentioned, to understand, so what we wanted to understand from the feedback sessions, number one was to kind of understand to improve research and research practices of members, what has sort of the feedback been and what has sort of worked and what hasn't worked for members. So what we heard was that the ethics dialogues and the coffee hour sessions have been valuable as spaces to learn about issues and challenges that different researchers and research organizations have been facing. And these learnings have in turn sort of influenced the way researchers have been doing their work or impacted the way they have been writing out research studies or reports. Um, Many members also called out that the documentation, the recording that we sort of send post all the events is quite useful as archives for members to revisit as and when they get the time, but as and when research studies sort of become relevant in their work. The diversity of topics that have been covered has been something that members have, of course, really enjoyed across qualitative as well as quantitative research studies. Many members also spoke about kind of attending sessions about maybe data or team science, which they sort of didn't have much knowledge or information about. Those are really great grounds for learning and sort of building their own knowledge.
Great. And in this section, what we do for each of these is capture some of the key actionable takeaways that came out. So these included ideas for potential new sessions. One of them was to do a question answer kind of session from a research point of view, where it's not really necessarily around a particular showcase, but there is a broad question that's posed at the audience, and both researchers who've engaged in that work and otherwise can sort of can engage in that conversation. Also, it was recognized that particularly the engagement and participation of senior researchers has been deeply valuable for younger researchers. And we will be going forward trying to think about how also we are able to leverage this connection that we're able to make between young researchers and senior ones. And finally, there was also another sort of element of how to even dial up this value that people get, especially in this 1 hour session, and how to make more value of that. And we heard this from several people, in fact, that if now that people know that every Thursday there's a coffee hour session, people are able to make time for it. It's very rare that they will go back and listen to a recording, even if it's there, etc. So how do we flesh this out even more and more? One idea was that we curate the session even more tightly, where it's not just a showcase, it could be multiple showcases, and we are really trying to get to a conclusive sort of question or a convergence by the end of that conversation. So something like that might be also quite useful. Over to you, Nitya.
Right. And the second value proposition was to kind of understand whether the network has been sort of beneficial to collate evidence around COVID-19. And many members articulated that CONET has successfully mapped the impact of COVID in India and the work being done by research organizations based all across the country, which helped members identify synergies as well as identify which organizations were doing work similar to their own. Many members mentioned that there have been many valuable conversations about collaborative outputs, but the action thus far has been sort of limited. Ideally, we wanted sort of the working groups to be the beginning as the fertile ground for joint outputs, but thus far the traction has been limited. But there have been seeds of very many fruitful conversations, and many organizations, whether on Slack or email, have been exchanging sort of details about outputs they'd like to create together, but actually those haven't yet seen the light of day. But thus far, like the interdisciplinarity of dialogues, as well as kind of reaching out to different members across the spectrum, has been very, very helpful for different kinds of organizations.
Great, thanks, Nitya. And some ideas around this was to actually find the time where relevant people could come together. So, I mean, as Anirudh was saying, we probably find this place where we create these working sessions where people are able to come together on a particular sort of focused agenda to work towards something. Of course, there was also a conversation around just doing more specific matchmaking around organizations that have data and people are looking for things. Uh, some people are already doing this on Slack, as we see informally, but how do we establish a place where the Secretariat is able or enabling more and more of these connections to happen is something to think about. Another thing that was quite interesting that we think is related to this is around schedules and timelines. And it would be great to also hear from what the rest of you think about this. But so now they had this idea that it would be great if we could sort of almost announce like an FLW fortnight or a nutrition fortnight or something in a way where basically people are able to be aware that this month is about these specific conversations in CodeNet. And so people are able to organize their calendars around it. We're able to also bring more interest on that particular topic in that month. So to move the radar much faster on that, or move the uh, sort of move much faster if everyone's on agreement, if for that period of time we're doing one thing. And this kind of comes as a critique of what happens presently in a format where every Monday we tell you what there is to do on that Thursday, for which sometimes people have the time and they are able to show up, but sometimes even if it's interesting they are not able to make the time, which is a challenge. So that was a piece of reflection. Yeah.
Right. And the third one, to drive visibility for research efforts. So again, through the various coffee hour sessions, ethics dialogues, or even Slack discussions, members were able to make deeper connections within research organizations that they perhaps prior knew before joining CoreNet, but also many of them didn't know many of these organizations. And they were able to put a name and face to the different kind of members within these organizations. So it did. So what we heard from the different members was that the networking feature, or the ability to connect with different kinds of research organizations and different members across different organizations, was indeed very successful, whether that was over Slack, whether that was over email, or even connecting over the chat of different events. Many members found that very, very useful to sort of identify synergies with their own work, but to also kind of understand what different people were doing and to kind of just expand their body of knowledge.
Right. But at the same time, it was made aware to us that potentially the ultimate potential of what a network like this can be for the world outside is maybe not something that we're capitalizing on completely. So especially with respect to our Twitter handle and what we can potentially do on LinkedIn, there is much more possibility, to integrate these platforms even more deeply, and for for us to be engaging with a wider non-Connect community, which possibly lies outside, which becomes a stepping stone to onboarding them and so on and so forth. So there was that, and also I mean Vihara sort of brought forth the idea of that there are also other development platforms and networks, and it might be useful to start having conversations at that level also to find what could be potential integrations. So that was another sort of piece of idea that came forth.
And with the drive of uptake of research among decision makers, many members felt that it was still a little too soon to expect the uptake of research among the decision makers, but the seeds of this endeavor indeed had been sown, and this would eventually happen with time. And now that the network had managed to sort of establish itself as a robust network within the community, and that people were engaging, people were excited, and there was enthusiasm, uptake with sort of decision makers would happen in the future. And definitely this was called out by many organizations that more participation from the government and decision makers would of course make the network a lot more valuable, which thus far has been quite limited.
Yeah, I mean, and we recognize this, and it was something that we have been trying to do also in the past few weeks. But like then again, the key point is like, how do we create that safe space for this engagement to happen in a constructive manner? So that's something that even we are internally reflecting on and would want to work towards. Some of the ideas here were to just be able to articulate and sort of draw out some sort of a demand supply pipeline. And that became a really interesting one where it's not just a working group lead that's working on this, but as a community, if you're able to draw out some of these and find out who those stakeholders are or what dissemination strategies should be, that would be good. Again, these are activities we have undertaken as in both the working groups. Some of these conversations are ongoing, but as at the wider sort of more sort of network level, we've not sort of established some of these. At the same time, I mean, much in alignment to this, there is a conversation around more targeted group conversations where uh, it's not that all the community needs to align, and some of this can happen through Slack, where we identify and coordinate with individual interested organizations to take some of these conversations forward, but in a way that the network is sort of aware of them. So these are again two of the ideas that came forward to build on this as we go along. Next.
And the last one, the last value proposition was to sustain ongoing and future research efforts of the members. And many members sort of articulated that the platform, CoreNet as a network, has made it much simpler to link up with research organizations and discuss data and areas for joint research and synergies. And many members also articulated that as we move ahead, the network would continue to focus on larger developmental outcomes and facilitate collaboration efforts agnostic of the pandemic. So eventually it could start looking at, the impact that the pandemic did have on research and how those energies and synergies and what work that leads to and how that could be areas for joint synthesis and collaboration.
Right, which would lead to also then figuring out if CoreNet could really be the place that does agenda setting as a community for where both research and decision making should be looking towards. And of course, some of that in terms of actual the convening would sort of turn to longer sessions, perhaps, that become not just a showcase, but more reflexive, honest, sort of open working room sessions. Especially because now we're at the point where as a community we've built a reasonable amount of trust among each other and ourselves, and that there is a potential to take this conversation even further. Secretariat, I mean, some of these also link to the role of the Secretariat. There's an interesting one from Dalberg where Shweta was trying to suggest that because Quicksand is most uniquely positioned at in a way that we have this panopticon sort of view of what's happening around. Every time we get a request to share a piece of work, etc., or curate an event, we should be the ones who work with individual organizations to figure out uh, how best to present it to the wider community and what connections there could be made. Some of these are already ongoing, and we plan to do these further. There's a conversation around mental health that we want to develop in this way. There is another conversation we're having with Dwara Research on social protection and their intention to help set up a working group. So that's also going to be done or unfolded in this sort of way. And finally, with the working group as well, if you're able to focus on what the work plan should be, and if that's more collectively sort of agreed upon, it helps us build the momentum going forward. There are multiple ways. I mean, I'll sort of end with this, I guess. There are multiple ways, and this has been fairly established that, we come back to this idea that there is a participation spectrum and that people can come together in small and big ways. And we just need to identify broadly what are the things as a community we're interested in, and how, especially those pieces we want to build further as proof of concept for the community of practice. Perhaps what we'll do is pause here, and we wanted to speak to all of you firstly about any reflections that you have based off of what we said. And if you could go to the next slide, Nitya. maybe I'll just open up for any general thoughts, feedback, and questions. Purnima, do you want to share?
Yeah, thank you, Rohan, and thanks for sharing the findings as well. I guess as someone who's constantly thinking about, how does what this collective has brought together, move forward, and how do we create a greater public good out of what people have learned and collected and engaged on here together. I guess I just wanted to suggest that, we host, maybe consider doing sort of a mega virtual conference or something like that, by thematic areas, sort of with the organization of it, of what's presented in there being done by some of the working groups. Because what my feeling is that a lot of the conversations have been very much more internal to the groups that are, we've been talking to each other, but we just, we've now understood so much about what some of the challenges are, either, we've just finished sort of getting a lot of data now on frontline workers. It's very clear as we start to collate findings on, say, food insecurity from multiple different data sources, that there is a big challenge there. But it's not enough that we know that. This is not going to help the people. This is not going to help the public. This is not going to help other people, advocates, the media people, influencers, to take these findings and sort of engage around it, right? So I would really argue that it is time, it is beyond time for a lot of what is being shared here or what has been brought together here to see the public light, and that, planning and hosting sort of an event where we bring sort of all of this together in its very grand reality. It's mind-blowing to me how much information is available to people across this network, is that we'll also really make a point, not just about what's important and what we've learned, but also about, the power of having come together to review and collect and at least learn about each other's work. So I would really argue for, maybe a 1.5 to 2 day, really sort of mega event from which we can distill sort of insights to share with policy, but also just make sure that a lot of people who should be hearing about this are there and that it's available to the public. So, I would really love to see this work move forward from that perspective. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Purnima. I think already there's some excitement around this in the chat section, which sounds great. Maybe it'd be great to hear from someone else as well, if there are any thoughts. But as I read this, the way we wanted to structure this, and I think it's still possible, is to say, going ahead, what pieces of this should we dial up or dial down? And what I'm hearing, and you can correct me if I'm not getting this correctly, but like especially pieces 3 and 4, which is to drive visibility as well as to improve uptake. Will the conference serve both of these functions, Purnima?
Yes, very much so. So, just as an example, we ran a 5-day a virtual event that was focused completely on the government's national nutrition program. And we had a whole strategy where for every session, we then summarized both the key insights and the key implications for policy. We prepared sort of a policy summary. We made sure we had a final session where we had, both key influencers and key folks in government. But then we also followed through, so for each of the bodies of work that were presented in the conference, we actually have a plan that we've been sort of working on, where not just the overall conference findings, but also thematically information is moving through to key implementation funder and government stakeholder groups. And so, I think, because again, conferences are a means to an end, but that end needs to be very clear, and there need to be people who commit to supporting taking things through, to whatever that a few of those ends might be. I'm also struck by how important investments in research have been around these things. And I feel like everybody here sort of did patchwork, in the sense that nobody here had a mega grant just to look at, what's happening, say, with food security. But when we put the findings together on food security, we realized that that would have been really very important and very useful to have sort of large scale existing platforms that can be leveraged to kind of periodically gather data on critical information that then made public. And the USER team and we have been talking about like the value of doing that kind of stuff. So I think there's many different ends that one could think about here, not just policy, but also thinking about feeding and supporting a research ecosystem. And the collective can work strategically towards all of those, and we have models for how to do that, and what it takes actually to try to keep some of that moving over.
That's great. Thanks, Purnima. Any other reflections on this?
Hi, Rohan. This is Shantanu.
Hi, Shantanu. Please go.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add. I mean, Purnima said it all. I think it's a great idea to have a conference just to discuss the impact of COVID in India. I mean, that's just amazing, I think. I mean, basically what CoreNet was doing, sort of getting all the researchers together to share findings on the impact of COVID, but still, I mean, although CoreNet has a wider reach, but still I think it is restricted to a certain group of members, people, researchers, etc. So if we can go beyond that through a conference, I think that would be really useful. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Shantanu. Kumar, would you like to tell us about?
Yeah, hi. So, as part of the COVID-19 response, IGC commissioned 8 studies, and 3 of them are on food security and nutrition, and 2 of them are on gender and labor market, and 1 is on health. So, and we'll start getting the final reports. So most probably we will do a mega webinar on COVID-19, and theme-wise, one is on the food security and other, most probably in February, because as we started getting the final reports and finalize the policy brief, so we will do that in February, most probably by mid-Feb, as per our dissemination plan, larger dissemination plan.
Right, that sounds good. And is it going to be just an IGC-led event, or are there also going to be other presentations? Or
no, we can do a combined, but we can do a joint webinar. There is no problem. But it was just because till now we didn't discuss on those line. But we can co-host that. That would actually help to reach larger audience.
Any of the other organizations, if this sounds interesting, what sort of specific value would you see in this? If there are any thoughts on, if this is sounding like an interesting idea, who would you want to see in this conference? Do you imagine other researchers, or how would that engagement be with the outside world? If there's any thoughts on that among the group?
Hi, Rohan. Arishi this side from Dwara Research.
Hi, Arishi.
Hi, everyone. No, I think this is a great idea. And I was just thinking in terms of value addition, it would be great if we could have a mapping exercise for the regions that the research would represent in this particular event. And if the Secretariat could ensure that all areas and all kinds of groups across the population are represented. Because I realize the entire typology of the body of work that we have currently going across the network is pretty diverse. Kind of an obvious point, but just wanted to flag it. And the second thing was that I'm not sure, but if we already covered that, will policymakers, practitioners be involved in the event?
Right. Sunita is also suggesting that potentially, I mean, in terms of timeline, of course, we can think about what that looks like. But yeah, I think the mapping is a really interesting one to also start with. It means also for us to already kickstart the idea of onboarding, just getting people familiar, and then having them work together to think about how they want to present their pieces. So that sounds really useful to me. Thanks, Arushi, for sharing. Sunita, do you want to unmute yourself and share your thoughts?
I don't really have anything super insightful to say. I just, I think Purnima's idea is fabulous. It's a great way to kind of rally together. Also, this idea of even the collation of evidence, I think there was some feedback around, Cornet being able to do that better. And so this conference might be a way to also really bring all of the evidence that's been generated together more synthetically. So it sounds like we might need small sort of conference type working groups that can take leadership in a particular thematic area to, pull together the agenda, the speakers, and so on. I think it's a fabulous idea.
Great. That sounds really interesting. She's already saying that they are sort of, we are part of the frontline workers group already putting together the dissemination strategy. So that will also be great. Indeed, yes. And I think for both of these at the moment, we're anyway talking about this whole from COVID to a post-COVID universe. And I think especially for that, the timing will be just right. And that will be useful. Please feel free, anyone, if they want to add, there is an active sort of chat conversation also going on. If anyone would like to also unmute themselves and speak up.
Hi, this is Prerna from Asar Center. This is a point I made in our feedback session with the Cornet Secretariat, but just to emphasize that I feel that there is so much that has gone into catalyzing this great research network. And we must also think if there is a way to sustain it beyond COVID, because there's such a great coming together of different organizations sharing learnings openly. And these issues are not going away, right? Of course, COVID exacerbated all of these issues, but the issues are not going away. So if we can also, as we plan next steps, think about how we could sustain this coming together of different research organizations, that would be very valuable.
Right. Prerna, if I may ask, if there's any sense of, if any thoughts you may have of how that might happen, like what do you mean when you say sustaining? Like, are there any combinations, permutations that you imagine already? Or is that too soon to say? Like what that might look like?
One concrete idea we already have is that, for instance, IFPRI and us have deepened some of our engagement. We were talking even before Cornet was set up. But we've deepened some of our engagement. We've partnered on the FLW research base, and we're already talking about issues that are relevant in COVID times, but also beyond, right? And so if members could themselves think of areas of research that they're interested in, which continues beyond this time period, and if the Secretariat, maybe we can have further conversations with the Secretariat and the Gates Foundation on what that might mean in terms of continuing to steer that effort, that would be interesting.
Right. I'm thinking of whether we should sort of talk about also using this idea of the conference to respond to Arushi's question. Arushi, do you want to share your question?
Sure, Rohan. So this is again coming from a conversation I had earlier this week about disseminating the research in multiple languages. So given that we will be using this particular conference event, which will again attract its own type of audience, I was also wondering if the network plans to disseminate research to quote unquote more democratically to other citizen groups as well. And of course, that bringing in its own complexity about the language we use to disseminate that research. And so again, the point being that we can again discuss whether we want to go down that route and whether the Secretariat is well placed for that sort of a role, or do we want to more proactively engage the grassroots level organization that we already have as part of this network? Just throwing that question open to everyone in the group.
Sure. I would like anybody, if there's anyone who would want to respond to Arushi's question, provocation.
Arushi, I'm trying to understand. This is the both ends question. Is that what we're discussing? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good. It's an interesting question, but I think that when we do things like virtual events, my experience has been that actually we can bring a lot of people into the events. I'll just give you an example. So the FLW research that we did, with the network, we've been presenting it in state after state, and we just presented in UP last week. And what was really amazing is that we had not just the policymakers, like the head of the UP Nutrition Mission, but we had CDPOs from the districts and the blocks that the data was collected in. Right. And it was really quite a phenomenal experience. Of course, it meant that we did the presentation both in, we had prepared it in English, then we realized that, oh my God, there's a lot of people here who probably won't do that. So we arranged for like a 5-minute, one of our colleagues did a 5-minute translation of the findings in the end into Hindi. Rasmi did that on the fly. It was pretty amazing. But it was really great to have them there. But it was possible because it was virtual. So I think, when we are doing some of these events, we should really open them up widely. We should encourage people to participate. Obviously, sharing and presenting the findings in, just in English becomes challenging. Right. But there's no reason why, if you have a 20-minute presentation in English, you can't also have an accompanying, online something in Hindi if needed, or if somebody can explain, if we know that there's folks from the audience there. So, I think it's useful for us to, and then the other thing, of course, is that there is citizen engagement around a lot of this work. Again, we've seen, I've seen sort of when we do things, we have a journalist who have joined some of our conferences. They've joined our research conferences and they ask really amazing questions. And then many of them will write really nice pieces after that. So just the power of actually doing something that's virtual is quite amazing. And I wouldn't overthink it. I would just say, people present their findings and we talk about what the implications of that are. And we make sure that if it's open to everyone with no restriction, then we've created energy around it. So in our UP work, for example, they were there, but they did say, the CDPO said, listen, this is not, we want to see this in more detail. So can you please arrange for another presentation just for us? But again, I thought that was quite neat that they felt it was interesting enough that they wanted to dig in a little bit more.
Right. Absolutely, Purnima.
Great. Yeah. Also, Priya sort of added her sort of thoughts to that, which I completely agree with also. And I mean, maybe it's not just either or, and we can think about also as communication designers, our team can think about how we disseminate what pieces of information from the conference itself, and that should be totally possible to do. Yeah, and we can see how we sort of matchmake between what kind of content reaches, ensuring that it reaches the right set of people. Great. Right. I'm going to pause here and ask if outside of this idea of the conference and also using it as a way to drive visibility, uptake, as well as concretized conversations around sustenance, is there anything else that we want to add or think about here, or we can move to the next section? Okay, maybe we move to the next section now, and we have about 15 minutes. So this was a conversation we wanted to have with all of you. Also, I mean, some of these are action points that we've already captured in doing the conference together, and I'm hoping that we can start by saying that we are doing it, or let's see how that goes. But it's really interesting that we start with an action point. As we were talking about this, if you remember, this gradient will kind of remind you of the spectrum of participation that we were talking about, right, at the beginning, right, where we said that at the very least, we expected our participants to sign up on Slack, to join and share their metadata on the web platform, etc., all the way to a leadership position on the right, which meant you sort of owned and sort of led a working group yourself, etc. So this is a version of that, but we got this framing from Purnima, in fact, who in her interview shared with us that we can be looking at these 4 activities, which are information sharing, cooperation, collaboration, and integration. And in this, we've sort of written out some of the things that we've been doing. In our interviews, we also came across 2 interesting things that are marked in blue. One was Dalberg sharing with us that with ID Insights, they were through Cornet, they figured that they were doing the study of nutrition at the same time. So they shared, in fact, on 1 or 2 questions, that they literally copied the question. And I mean, they used the same question across, and that became really useful as a starting point. And of course, we know that the FLW multi-state study that IFPRI and several other partners have been leading is also a very good demonstration of what some of this concrete collaboration could look like. We wanted to just also get a temperature check from the room about whether everything that you see on the board right now captures everything that you imagine doing as part of Coordinate and offshoots of that, or is there anything that what more can we add here, if you will? And maybe I guess we could also start with anyone who'd like to share with us, uh, maybe as their own organization, what pieces they've done and what they would like to do more of as they go ahead. Maybe that's also great if for a starting point. If anyone would want to volunteer for that, like share with us which ones have you engaged more in and what you'd like to do more in the future. All right. So, I guess we can take that. So far, what we might have gathered is fairly accurate then. I guess maybe we can pause here and ask in case if anyone has any other suggestions, things to add to this, remove from this. I guess then I could just let you know that, this conversation is ongoing. So in case if you do come up with more ideas or any thoughts, please feel free to share them with us. And perhaps we'll also think about how to frame this better, in which I guess it becomes more, uh, we are able to elicit like more constructive feedback as we go ahead. But I should say that these conversations have been deeply useful for us going forward. So we'll keep you all posted about what changes as we go ahead. Yeah, that's all. Is there any questions, thoughts that anyone had and they'd like to share with us?
Yeah, Rohan, so Shantanu here. So, these are very comprehensive list of activities one can think of. So really nothing more to add to this. So this is great. Yeah.
All right. I guess if we could go to the next slide with Dan, we could just share what we plan to do as we go ahead. So this is a really opportune partnership that has come our way, and we thought it would be a good sort of moment to also share with you all. We are partnering with the National Bioethics Conference, which is a series of ongoing events. This year is the 8th one. It happens once every 2 years. It's happening every Saturday. So this Saturday, and they basically gather about 500 to 700 researchers across different domains of bioethics, medical practitioners, and researchers. We've got the opportunity to partner with them thanks to Dr. Mala Ramanathan, who some of you may have heard from the IRP Coffee Hour. And this conversation that we're having with them, which is next Saturday, is going to be about ethics in research and taking some of our IRP Coffee Hour conversations ahead. It's going to describe the broad lay of the land, but also particularly talk about what happens when you're speaking to vulnerable populations, such as cases of violence against women, etc. So that's the conversation that I will also be sharing with you details of by tonight, which is next Saturday, which Coordinate is partnering with the NBC for. This is happening this Saturday. So there are 3 events that we'd just like to share with you information for. The first one, if you go back one slide, Nitya, is one on clinical ethics in healthcare. The second one is on COVID-19 in ICUs and challenges, and the third one is about voices from the margins. So we think these will be interesting also to just learn about what else is happening in other pockets of research as we go ahead. As we go we're also thinking about how to partner with them more. There's going to be more epidemiological research that you'll start seeing also as part of CoreNet as we're onboarding more and more members. So we'll keep you posted about that. Yeah, well, that's probably all from me. Yeah, thanks again for all of your time and for your contributions. We've got some really interesting ideas on this one. We'll discuss them and we should be able to take some of them forward. So thanks again very much, everyone.